Oh, hi. Uh, Greta asked me if I would take a moment to tell you a little bit about my new book. It just came out. This is my fourth book. It's called Indian Raids and Massacres, Essays on the Central Plains Indian War. And it's published by Caxton Press, a publisher that's been in business publishing Western history for about 100 years. This is a book that I've labored over for a number of years because each chapter has been a published article in a private historical association. Many of them in this chapter from the Denver Westerners as little roundups. But in each instance, I have put these chapters into chronological order, which starts with 1864 and goes roughly to 1870, and covers what is called the Central Plains Indian War. The Central Plains is that land from the Platte River that goes through Nebraska and Wyoming and Colorado, South Platte included, but the North Platte mostly, down to the Arkansas River, which is the southern part of Colorado, and in through Kansas. That's the Central Plains that the Cheyenne dominated in the 1860s, and the conflict broke out from there. So these are different little stories that I have worked on for a number of years and revised each of them for this book. And actually, one of the things that I sold it to Caxton on in the book proposal was that these chapters can be read in any order. So if you've got an interest in chapter 6, for instance, the Kidder Massacre, you could read that by itself. They all have their own introductions and that sort of thing, but they're also in a chronological order, and it is a standardized book sort of thing. So anyway, this just came out. September 4th is when I got my first copy. So it's available on Amazon. It's available on Caxton Press's website. Right now they're offering a discount if you order it. And it's also available in Beulah if you contact me and want a signed copy. I'm real proud of this. Let me tell you just a little bit what it covers. Colorado history is chapter 1, the Hungate Massacre, which happened June 11th, 1864, outside of Denver. A young family was killed by the Indians. I propose a whole new story about why they were killed, and I got my information for this from the National Archives in Washington, D.C., as well as our archaeological investigations at the site. And then chapters 2 and 3 are kind of related, and this happens in Nebraska with the Plum Creek Massacre on August 7th, 1864, the Little Blue Massacre on August 7th, 1864, and the Plum Creek Massacre on August 8th, 1864. Some accounts say as many as 100 settlers and freighters were killed during that time. But at least 35 were, and it was a terrible tragedy in what happened. But it really initiated the Cheyenne War that began. From that, Governor Evans then got the 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry initiated the day he learned of that, of which my great-great-uncle was in Company G out of Colorado City, but at the time was living here in Pueblo. And then from that, the Sand Creek Massacre happens, and after that, one of the survivors of the Sand Creek Massacre, Mennonick, and this leads us into chapter 4. This really inflamed the war as it continued on, and 2 little girls were captured up in Wyoming, roughly about 50 miles west and north of present-day Cheyenne, on their way to Salt Lake City and then to California. Their mother was killed. The little brothers were escaped. They weren't as far out in front of the wagon train where the girls were with their mother. One was 2 years old and one was 17. The 17-year-old was rescued 7 months later, but the 2-year-old was never rescued. And we thought maybe lost to history, even though the family tried to find her. But from evidence that I found, both in the National Archives and in my research, in 1900, when Indians, Arapaho Indians came down to Casper, Wyoming, about 100 miles south of their Wind River Reservation to collect their annuities. They brought several wagons down and the trains unloaded all the goods. And while the male Indians were putting together the wagon trains, loading up the freight wagons to take back up to the Wind River Reservation, about 20 Indian women were selling, as the paper said, their trinkets to Casper residents. And they noticed that one of the women was obviously white, blonde hair and blue-eyed, and but couldn't speak a lick of English. So they asked one of the men with the wagons who could speak English if he knew her story. He said, "Yeah, we captured her as a little girl 35 years earlier." That's 1865. This is 1900. It gets on national news, and the older sister, now living in Davenport, Iowa, and having a family, reads it and thinks this might be her sister. She begins some communication with the Indian agent at the Wind River Reservation, a guy named Nickerson, and who then discussed this possibility with this Indian lady through an interpreter, of course, because she couldn't speak any English, and determined that this indeed might be her sister. So in 1902, the two sisters met on the Wind River Reservation with an interpreter, and indeed it was little Lizzie Fletcher. But Lizzie told her older sister that she had no memory of her white world, and she wants nothing to do with it and didn't want to see her sister again. She was an Indian and she would die an Indian. But as you know, Hollywood started not long after that with the silent films, and in 1923 she was out in California with her husband, John Brokenhorn, and she changed her name from Kels to Brokenhorn to Lizzie Brokenhorn after meeting her sister. And her picture was taken, and that's in the book. You can clearly see she's white in Indian garb. That's chapter 4. Chapter 5 takes us to 1867 in the spring, and that's General Custer's first Indian campaign with the 7th Cavalry, newly formed. He actually brings 350 men into Colorado. A lot of people don't know that. And he stayed near where Sterling is today, and had a bunch of men desert, and he was court-martialed after this campaign ended. But while he was there at Riverside Station, he got on a telegraph and he learned that a Lieutenant Kidder from Fort Sedgwick had been sent to deliver orders to him that he had missed, Custer had missed, and he had never met up with Custer, and they were very worried about those 10 men. And that's chapter 6, is the Kidder Massacre. And so new information is covered in all those that I've got from the National Archives, and also locating and determining what happened in the battle site with metal detecting. Chapter 7 gets into what I call the philosophy of history, because a lot of modern Indian war historians, they're named in the book, but I won't name them here, have done some pretty poor research and interpretations on documents. It's called historiography, but it's called philosophy of history. I have a PhD in philosophy, so I've been trained in that all my life, my adult life. And I lay out their errors and use documents that start yet another Indian raid in August of 1868 in north central Kansas that resulted in Beecher Island and the Battle of the Washita. And so chapter 7 is kind of a historiography. Chapter 8 takes us back into Colorado and continues with those August raids, both in Colorado and Kansas. And then chapter 9 is after the Battle of the Washita, and it's the Indians come right back into the north central Kansas, kill 11 settlers, and take 2 women captive and a 8-month-old child who's killed in captivity 3 days later. And this starts what is chapter 10, and that is the Battle of Summit Springs and Buffalo Bill Cody, who's the scout that finds the village. There's a lot of mistruths about the Summit Springs battle, which was fought July 11th, 1869, near Sterling, Colorado. And that broke the Cheyenne resistance in Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas. And basically the raids ended after that. But there were 2 women that were taken captive in those May 1869 raids that led to this military campaign that ended up at Summit Springs. Cody found the village. And again, if you read books about Summit Springs, you find people saying that Cody didn't do anything there and missed the fight. And I've got all the evidence to show that he indeed was there and was the real deal. This was all before he was ever discovered and known. He was only known to the 5th Cavalry. And so there was a soldier in all of this stuff that was going on that got a Medal of Honor in that campaign, and that's chapter 11, and that's a soldier that was killed by Wild Bill Hickok in a big brawl in Hays, Kansas on July 17th, 1870. And it's the story about this soldier, and I uncovered all of the truth about it in the National Archives. He was a multiple deserter 5 times. He was in different branches of the infantry and cavalry, but he got a Medal of Honor in this campaign that ended up at Summit Springs, and then almost to the day, a year later, he's killed by Wild Bill Hickok in a drunken brawl. So I've uncovered the truth about that. If you read any book on Hickok, you don't understand the story about this man that he killed in that brawl. And then chapter 12 is an interesting story that involves the Pony Express and Indian fights on the South Platte River in 1865, in the first retaliation after Sand Creek, and a person that had a very, very interesting life, and his story's never been told. And I found it in the National Archives, and I found it in other sources. Jim Moore, and he's one of the he's not a founder of Cheyenne, but he owns the first livery in Cheyenne in 1867. Dies in 1873. It's a fascinating story about him. And then the last chapter is I got a grant when I was a college professor through my college in Denver, State College. Got a grant from Colorado to try to find the lost grave of Susanna Alderdice, one of those 2 captives that were taken in 1869 that the cavalry tried to rescue at Summit Springs. One was rescued and she was lost to history. I found all her descendants, got a picture of her. We know her story, and that's in my book, in that Summit Springs chapter. And the other was killed at Summit Springs, and that was Susanna Alderdice. When she was captured, her 5-year-old son was killed, her 2-year-old son was killed, her 8-month-old daughter was killed 3 days later in the village. She was 5 months pregnant with her 5th child, and her 4-year-old boy was wounded with 5 arrows in his back, unconscious, and records say he was also shot twice in the back and speared through the left hand. And he lived and got lost to history. I found all his descendants. I got pictures of him. And we wanted to find his mother, to bring her back to Kansas to be buried where her son Willis died in 1920 and is buried. So chapter 13 is the report that I wrote, and it's expanded a bit in here for the grant. We used modern archaeology, we used ground penetrating radar, we had all kinds of good clues from military reports and that sort of thing as to where her body might be at the Summit Springs battlefield, which is private property today. But it's a moving story, and this book's 500 and some pages, and I think you'll enjoy it if you read it. Thank you.